Thinking about climate change and the sea rising above your head, considering taking charge of your sustainability? Pause, think about it with considerable thought, and consider where we go from here. Stay tuned and hear from our guest this evening, Mr. Carlos Palacious, as we talk about how we can change the way we move forward and become sustainable, personally sustainable. Join our co-sponsors, Domdev Enterprises and Page Investment, and our friends at Something to Think About. Post your questions, ask what you would like, tell us where you are in the world and why you want to be interested in this subject. We'll be right back.
Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles.
Welcome to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. What we think, we become. What we radiate, we attract. And what we imagine, we surely can achieve. Let's change the narrative 242. So this evening, as we mentioned, that we have in this great gentleman in front of me, young, vibrant, strong, energetic, and a great thinker, putting his things to work on the floor, up in the concrete and engineering, and a number of other things that we have. He's an engineer by training, he's an environmentalist by nature, and an entrepreneur by heart. And as we all know, the executive of a profession. And he's the first coastal engineer in the Bahamas. Bam! Saying something there. Number one. Founder and manager of principals of several engineering and technology related businesses, including BRON, Eeden Farms, and the BluTerra. We talked about BluTerra a little bit a week or two ago. A little more than that, I think. I lose track of time. And what that could bring to the table. But he's a national developer, but most importantly to me, he's a family man. And so, you know, the little ones have control over our lives. And so we're going to be on point, concise, direct, and answer all your questions that you put to us. Welcome, Carlos Palacious. How are you?
Thank you so much, Dale. It's appreciated. I have seen so much of your contributions, obviously, in the think tank group. We had some great dialogue at a recent function, so it's an honor to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Awesome. Thank you for that confidence. Now, we know that people who have plenty of letters behind their name, you know, I don't have no letters by intentional, but they typically are aristocrats and uppity people. But you, I know you to be a fundamentally grounded and sound gentleman. And that's gentleman with a big G, right? So tell us today now. Your solutions are always simple and sustainable. And in engineering school, I was taught that sustainability comes at minimum when there's practical, functional, feasible, healthy, and safe in the solution bearing. Did you have that same experience when you went to school? Did they teach? Because I know it was a couple of years between when I went and you went, but...
Absolutely. And the powerful thing about education is that, you know, we grew up on an island and in a country of, I guess, 200,000 plus people in Nassau and 300,000 plus people in the entire country. We really are in a little bubble here, right? Mm-hmm. So it's amazing when we go off to study internationally, the exposure, the network, the access that we gain. And the powerful thing I think about education, and especially in studying engineering, is you are surrounded by some of the brightest minds in what hopefully is the developing and sustainable development world. And so absolutely, sustainability is based on the premise of striking a balance between economics, because if it can't be built, if it can't remain a functional part of society, then oftentimes there won't be a place for it. It obviously is huge with environmental preservation, which is a core aspect of engineering systems, making sure that the environment will remain functional, both in terms of its own survivability, as well as providing whatever services and goods are needed to humanity. And then, of course, it's sustainability has to do with longevity, understanding that the decisions we make now impact us in the long run. I love a quote that I think comes from a Greek philosopher. You know, we plant a seed in whose tree, we plant a tree in whose shade we will not sit, and we sit under a tree that we did not plant. And so I think that is the cornerstone of what sustainability really is.
Awesome stuff. So now we're here talking a little bit about climate change, and we've heard much talk, and plenty talk, and mistalk, and upside down talk, and all kind of stuff. But to me, it's fundamentally as the acceleration of the earth warming process that is happening. And it's due, in my mindset, to the ignorance and to the disrespect that man's actions is having in reference to the balance of carbon dioxide in the air and generating things that cause more carbon dioxide to be in the air and so forth. And so what would you say as a professional is the proper definition of climate change?
Thanks. That's a great question, Happy. I would start by saying that climate change, first of all, has a major natural component to it. I think we sensationalize to a certain extent what humans have done over the years and not acknowledge that we do as a world go through these various cycles of climate change. So there's millions of years of data that verify that we have had ice ages in a cyclical nature from the beginning of time. So the last ice age that we had was somewhere between 11,000 and 20,000 years ago. So that's not as long as you think. 11,000 and 20,000 years ago, the last time we had an ice age. And once again, my mind is simple, so I have to think and break it down in simple terms. So if that was the last time we had an ice age, we're clearly not in one now. And the Earth is millions of years old. I'm sure we've had many ice ages over that period. So I would expect scientifically that another ice age is coming. Now, what's the difference? We had the Industrial Revolution, right, where we released because that's allowed populations to boom, development to happen, blah, blah, blah. And it's released a number of toxins into the environment, many things. We've pumped stuff into rivers. We've put mercury in fish. We've released gases into the atmosphere. These things have impact, right? We have a footprint on Earth, just like any other organism. And we've increased our footprint likely significantly beyond where we need it to be. So are we guilty? Yes. Would there have been an ice age and climate change if we weren't on the Earth? Yes. Is it happening faster because we're here? Yes. Can we do something to stop it? Probably not. Can we do something to slow it down? Yes.
Well, I would say not necessarily slow it down, but slow down the pace of which we're contributing for it speeding up. Yeah,
absolutely. Exactly. We're saying the same thing. Can we slow down the pace or not contribute, not make it happen faster than it needs to? Absolutely. But no matter what, it was going to happen if we could all agree. So there's a significant natural component to climate change that oftentimes gets missed in the whole mix.
Right. So now, a fellow like me who liked the University of YouTube and so forth, there's these organizations like the COP26 that the Prime Minister had such a vibrant speech to, which people caught on and stuff like that. I think that's the first time a lot of people knew about that entity. But those entities as such define that as commonly targeting that energy, transportation, and the industrial industry are primarily the gigantic contributors to climate change as we define it just now, and accelerating the carbon dioxide in the air. So we're talking about 50 billion tons a year. Is that still the current figure? Because that's the last ones I saw about that.
So it gets updated regularly. The global standard for establishing what those ranges are comes from the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change. And so they typically establish those benchmarks. And the reality is nobody's 100% certain. So you'll always see they produce a graph, and that graph has a variance, with a high scenario and a low scenario. The point is that most of the things that sustain our current lifestyle, the way we are and the way we live as human beings, are significantly contributing to the acceleration of climate change. That is something that is scientifically proven now. And it can be verified in many ways. And the most common way is to just look at the amount of greenhouse gases by drilling cores into the ice caps. And we can see what greenhouse gas levels were at when the seas were at different heights. And we can look at that and understand, well, when it was this condition, the world froze over. When it was this condition, it seemed like sea levels were lower, right? So we can gauge where we lie and gauge how quickly we are, let's say, speeding up that process relative to how quickly it happened in previous years. And understand that if the major difference is the population, then probably humans are a major contributor to that.
Right. And so that means that we are following in that light what Peter Drucker says, that if you can't manage what you can't measure. And so the world is measuring these things, and so that tells us where we should sit in the picture. And so that's when they throw up the flag and say, well, hey brother, slow down, you burning too much gas when you put your foot heavy on the pedal. You can cause an accident somewhere, right? And our accident today is what we call climate change. Now, so the percentage now, 50 billion tons, like you say, that varies, but most of that is generated elsewhere. And we this little dot on the map, mind you, very pretty from space and everything else, so that may be important. I always say God lives here. But what percentage of that would we say is contributed by the Bahamas?
So, and I would not know, and it would be an insignificant amount of the global percentage. But why it is significant is because everything is still prorated, right? Or it's relative to how many people are in the society. Now, I always challenge persons when we have this conversation. We all buy cheap stuff online and bring it in. We all still bring in the cars. We don't produce the cars, but we're still importing the cars, and we have about 5 of them in the driveway, even though only 3 people live there, right? We still heavily consume a lot of the consumer products that are contributing to greenhouse gases. So while we say, yes, we're not the ones out there producing it ourselves in our country, we are still contributing by being the consumers of the same goods. So our footprint per capita isn't, in my opinion, and I've seen some studies on it, much lower than most of our North American counterparts, because we are still a part of the process that creates it. And that's where I challenge us often to determine how we can improve our own footprint. How can we just simply reuse things? Like, rather than using single-use plastics or single-use knives and forks, like, why not just use, metal? Why not use glass cups rather than cups that get thrown away? So there's things that we definitely can do a better job at, even as Bahamians, to help the footprint.
Yeah. So when we look at that, so we know we're not a big producer, but we have clout. I mean, if we could cause apartheid to happen, to shut down in South Africa, I mean, we have clout to do some things. And so there's some things that we should be doing, and part of it is being team players in this process, like you mentioned, and so forth. And so when we look at it, we say that, what does climate change mean to the Bahamas? If we continue to go in this direction, I mean, we talked about it a lot. People say we're going to be drowning soon or whatever. But what does that really mean?
Great question. So let's put it into context, right? And I like to refer to facts. So the Bahamas is one of the top 10 impacted countries on Earth by Atlantic hurricanes. That's a fact. You can pull the record of all the hurricanes in the last 100 years, and you'll see that the Bahamas Abaco specifically, Abaco, Grand Bahama, and Eleuthera get impacted more than any other islands in the Bahamas. Once again, that's just numbers, right? So when you understand that, we're clearly at risk. So even if you separate climate change and how quickly is the water rising and when will we all flood, you can sort of argue whether that'll be 100 years from now, 200 years from now. The point is, we know as Bahamians that these impacts happen. We've seen Dorian, etc. So how do we personally protect ourselves before it's too late, right? Because we know one day it's going to be too late, right? So how do we take those steps now? And I always start, once again, from the highest level of accountability, which is you as an individual. And I think we had this conversation before.
Yeah, we can get to that. We can get to that part, but I just wanted to finish putting context to it a little bit.
Sure. So context. So I can add something more to the context of our approach to climate change and whether we're, let's say, going to sink, etc. The Bahamas has taken us few very large scale steps. Like, for example, we have per capita more marine protected areas than most places in the Caribbean per capita. Right. So we've identified certain areas that we consider vulnerable habitats. They're important to our fisheries, to certain industries, and we're also important as it relates to protecting us from storms. So that is very significant. They protect, one, our freshwater lands, which is critical to our sovereignty, and two, protect certain habitats, whether coral reefs. Don't forget, we have one of the largest barrier reef systems on Earth. We forget to really discuss that, right? So there are certain steps, and putting in place more policies, et cetera, to control what we can and cannot do in certain areas of our country is the largest single step we can make at a macro level to protect ourselves from climate change.
Right. Okay. So that's awesome. So from a macro point of view, we have those barriers or those shields or halos or whatever we want to call it up to protect us somewhat. And so as we drill down now and we start to get into the nuts and bolts of us as individuals and what we can do, I think part of it is understanding where does the biggest contributions come from. And so, you talk about energy, agriculture, forestry, industry, transportation. I think they're the big names that are always called. So when we look at that from the Bahamas perspective, I would think transportation is at the top. Now, I might be wrong because that's the one we see the most, at least the one I see the most. Maybe energy. I mean, people, we do burn a lot of energy. We drink a lot of beer and we burn energy. I don't know why the two of them go together, but somehow they go together. So do we have numbers on those as to how those are distributed in terms of how we contribute, or we don't have?
So we do have some numbers on those. There have been studies. I don't have them in front of me right now, specifically. But yes, we do know, and similar to what you've said, like we're pretty inefficient in how we produce our electricity, as you know, burning oils that are not the most sustainable. We know that there's a part of it as well. So it's one thing to say, this is what's contributing, right? It's another thing to say, what is the easiest for us to replace with a more sustainable or a more climate resilient option, right? So it's one thing to say, all right, we have too many cars, but if we don't have a proper bus system, then how can you get rid of the cars, right? So I'm painting the picture here. It's one thing to say, all right, yes, our production of electricity is unsustainable, but how easy is it to get solar? Like, as another example, right? I have solar on my house, for example. My house runs on solar. It was very expensive, you see. So once again, what options are available in your economy? What legislation support that? What incentives are put in place? What tax breaks are put in place? Because that is how we evolve, right? And so all of that is important in the conversation, rather than, let's say, just in the silo of, well, we're producing too much from cars. Okay, let's fix that with a proper bus system. Then we can get rid of some of the cars.
Right. Yeah, that is the view that actually that's the view that we used to take at BTC in terms of how we used to approach innovation. Even though we cannibalize 90% of what we actually did before, intentionally to move things in the right direction. And maybe today our governments and private sectors and stuff need to start doing some of that in order to get to where we need to get. Because if we are agreeing that we need to change our habits in order to become more sustainable, to be able to fight the wave that is coming. I mean, I say the wave, you know what I mean? The climate change. Then that takes intentional thought and stuff for us to be able to do those things as a group, because everybody always have some other thing. We have incentives, we have government being given to fossil fuel industry persons, and so the question is, okay, is that practical and sensible today versus what it was back then, where we're now looking at a clean environment or needing to have a clean, more environment.
Agreed.
Right?
And I'll add something to that. There's something called ecosystem services. And
Right.
why that's important is everything comes down to money. Let's just be real, right? The economics of things. So jobs have to be created, development has to happen. And I'm in the development industry, just to be very clear. So I'm in the sustainable development industry. So our role in our company at BRON, we develop sites. We make sure that it fits code, best practices, it's done in a sustainable way, et cetera. But we obviously will continue to have a footprint as human beings, right? We're not going to pack up and go and live in a treehouse. I mean, that's not practical, right? So where do we strike the balance? And understanding ecosystem services means that, all right, for every, let's say, acre of mangrove or acre or square foot of coral reef, what value in dollars does that add to our economy and to our environment? So there's actually a dollar value that we put on that. So if
and are we measuring that? I mean, we say that that's what we're supposed to be doing, but are we as a country doing that?
So we as a country, the IDB have done extensive studies on it. The National Trust have those numbers. The Nature Conservancy have those numbers are available. Now, are we using that in our decision making? Is a different question. But we know in the Bahamas how much a square acre of mangrove is, right? And so now if a decision has to be made for a development to happen in an area, then how much is it costing us in terms of storm surge protection, the small reef and nursery fish that would grow up in that area? What is the dollar value that we're losing by removing that? You see, and that has to be compared to the economic benefit of building that, whatever it is, hotel or dredging that area. And once again, I'm not anti-dredging because that has to happen, but that is where the numbers are important. And that fits into this entire discussion around sustainability and climate change.
Right. And some people always say that there's the numbers might look right, but the decision is not necessarily right because of the numbers. So all those things we have to take into consideration as we go. When we look, you mentioned some of the things like the mangroves and the rest. There are persons around the world who say that our mangroves and so forth, the corals and stuff like that, they are basically absorbers. And we can get carbon credits because of our extensive amount, and then, as you mentioned, us being even reserving them or making them off limits for persons to do. Is that something that is being engineered today to come up with a proper system?
Yes, that is something that I'm aware of that is being orchestrated for the Bahamas to be a global leader in that space.
Awesome. And could that make a big dent in our need for capital to do?
My understanding is that it can. The challenge is there's no globally accepted value for a carbon credit. So it's kind of negotiated. This precedent set mostly with forestry related carbon credits. And as industries start to get more penalties in developed countries for their footprint. So, for example, the cement industry, the glass industry produces a lot of greenhouse gases. Like they significantly contribute to climate change, right? So they are slowly getting more tariffs in their countries because of the contribution they're making. As a result, they are now looking for opportunities to offset that with carbon credits. The Bahamas is blessed because we have so much water, we have shallow banks, and our banks and our water actually sequester carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. So they absorb it, right? Also, the process by which, for example, aragonite is made is similar to photosynthesis, like a plant. So it absorbs the carbon dioxide and it produces oxygen. So the reason why we had voted as the clearest earth
Right.
or cleanest air, that is actually a big part of why our air is so clean. It's not because Bahamians aren't driving cars. Don't get us wrong, right? We
Or
obviously have
eating macaroni.
big macaroni. We have a large country, and we only populate about 3 to 5% of it, right? So we're a big country. We don't actually, there's not many of us. When you go to most family islands outside of Nassau, there's hardly anyone there, and there's acres of land, right? My dad's from Inagua, my Grammy's from Acklands. Like, yeah, there's a couple hundred people, but for the most part, there's large, vast areas of land, and there's for the most part vast areas of undeveloped land, which means the habitat's still in place, the mangroves and wetlands, etc., are still in place. And as a result, we are actually a very green nation. We might think we are, but per capita, we are really a clean nation, even with all the cars we see piled up in Nassau.
Right. So
we can do better, but we're nowhere near the list in terms of significant contributors per capita.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. So then that puts us on the other side in terms of the absorption and the like, so that we could make sure that our conscience is good, that we are doing all that we can to make sure that our absorbers are operating in peak mode, right? And whether that's the coral, because they tell me the coral is the same thing in the sea as where the trees are on land. I don't know exactly how that works, the details of that, but so if we have stuff like that, because I always say sun, sand, sea, people, and digital are cornerstones as to what we should build this $100 billion economy that I keep talking about. Some people have yet to buy into, but they will come. But when we look at that, then sun, you already mentioned it, but solar, all of these things have a way of deflecting the production of carbon dioxide. The sun and the sea may absorb it. So then we're dealing with people and digital. And so digital will help us deflect. But people is what we want to drill into. And so what we will do right now is that we will come back and speak to some things directly related to what we as individuals can do in order to improve our net carbon space and so forth. And so you've been listening to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. Our guest this evening is Carlos Palacious. And we know that this young man has a lot to offer to our country, and he has a wealth of energy to do it because he has a fireball waiting for him at home. We'll be right back.
Sammy's Chicken. There's nothing like it.
Behind every scoop, lick, and savor is a smile and memory being made or reminisce. Whether you're at work, out with family on a Sunday, or have friends visiting, flavor will meet expectations in our 32-ounce container for only $10 if you're having a special event as well. Exotic flavors ranging from soursop to Guinness is definitely worthwhile.
Welcome back to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. We're here this evening talking with Carlos Palacious on what we can do to ensure that we can breathe in this Bahama land, right? You know, everybody like to breathe. Anybody like no fingers over your nose or nothing like that. And so we want to make sure we keep all of those things away from us. And so welcome Carlos back. And we're now going to drill into the individual. You, myself, the little one, everybody else. What can we do as individuals? Because we tend to think in the Bahamas that everything is, oh, the government got to do this, the government got to do that, or some rich man behind the gate got to do this or do that, and it's nothing that we could do as individuals. And you said something the other day that pricked my interest in a big way, because it was like almost like a light bulb went off to say, oh, somebody else is thinking the same way. And you said something to do with we are our first responders in our own life.
Mhm. Yes.
What thought provoked that to you the
Sure.
first time you?
So, from a little child, my parents, so full disclosure, I'm an only child, and both of my parents are priests. And
Oh boy,
so,
two halos.
two, two priests. And so, as an only child, obviously, without siblings, and you have cousins and things like that, you spend a lot of time with your parents. And one thing my parents always instilled was a sense of individual responsibility. So, teacher couldn't do this. Joe didn't cause you to do that. You take accountability and responsibility for your actions, right or wrong.
Right.
And if anything, you should be making sure that if you're in a situation, even if it doesn't go the way you think it should, that you are leading and taking responsibilities for your own action. So, with that being sort of programmed into me from early on, it has always been my approach that what am I doing to help better a situation?
Right.
And that starts with you, right? And obviously, that's the basis of society. We spoke about our kids. You know, each of your two sons, you would have instilled certain values in them. They now go out into the community. They then go out into the world, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to change the world, you start with yourself. So my question is, for example, Hurricane Dorian happened. Every Bahamian was touched by it. We all directly were touched by it, our relatives, families, and friends, or we clearly, visibly saw and understood and emphasized. What have we done to improve or correct our own lives to take steps to better ourselves to be prepared? One simple thing. Many Bahamians don't know how to swim, right? A basic life skill. We live on an island and we joke about this regularly, right? And we understand cultural norms, why many of us might not. But are we making sure that we have the basic skills that are needed in order to survive? When we throw garbage out of our windows, we leave it on the beach. We talk about wanting to protect beaches, coral reefs, etc. We know how important it is, but we leave our litter all over it. Easter weekend's coming up. You take a before and after picture of our beaches. We already know what's coming. Our beaches will be full of litter. Our water glass bottles will be there. We'll be taking it out, etc. So are we really taking the individual pride and steps to, one, be first responders in our own lives, know how to swim, basic things like that, as an example. And then two, are we doing what we know is important to protect the environment? Everyone in the country knows littering is bad. There's no question about it. But are we willing to pick up that garbage that we didn't put down? Because that helps to protect those same fish or turtles, etc. And we're all connected through the ecosystem. So how are we being good stewards in our own lives and for our environment?
But you know, you say that everybody in the Bahamas knows that littering is bad. I'll give you an example. In 2006, Leon Williams promoted me to executive. And he told me I had to come out of engineering to go over to the operations side of technical operations, per se. That's the guys who service homes and businesses and take care of networks and all of that stuff. So, you know, I had one condition that I would accept it, and that was that I could do what I wanted to do, right? Which, you know, in a government entity, there's only but so far you could go, but still, you know, you got to stretch the limits. So, you know, one of the first things that I saw glaring from that division was that people did not understand what was their job function, the benefit of their job function to the bottom line of the company. And so you say that we all know about littering, but people hear it, and same thing on the job. But do they really know the connection between littering and why it's not a good thing to do? Do we really know that? Go ahead.
So whether we know it or not, right? I think it comes down to, do we police it? That's the reality. What is policed will drive a part of our culture. I visited Singapore. I visited
Not
other
exactly
countries.
true. Sorry to cut you off, but that's a military state more so than anything else, right? Because I mean, we have policing here, but people still don't do what is what. And I'm not going to take it down the road where all of that part of it, but what I'm saying is that when at least what I in my experience is, when people understand their purpose, the reason or the connection to something, they have more affinity to comply with it than when somebody trying to browbeat them into doing something. Go ahead. You go ahead.
So I think that there's two sides to the coin. One is this cultural aspects to who we are. For example, you don't have to tell a Bahamian how to prepare for Junkanoo. We've done it for decades. We take pride in it. We show up on Boxing Day and New Year's Day, and it's a show. It's an amazing show. Rain, wind, we're going to show up, and we're going to give our best. That's a cultural thing. Nobody is out there policing the Junkanooers or policing people to, you have to start making your costume. No, we show up and we look good. We own it, right? Other things, it's important to determine what will be accepted and what will not be accepted.
I agree.
As an example, can you just take off all your clothes and walk around naked? No, because you'll probably be arrested, you'll probably go to jail, and you'll probably either end up in the crazy house or fined. It's not tolerated.
Right.
So that's an example of something that our society has determined is important. As a grown person, you cannot walk around naked, right? So if as a society, and that's something that's policed, to be very clear, good luck just walking around and thinking nothing's going to happen to you, right? So how quickly do we want to get the change to occur? Clearly, like I said, we're good at Junkanoo and nobody has to police that. So do we wait for 3 or 4 generations, 20, 30 years, 40 years to determine that littering is bad for the environment and it's bad for tourism? It destroys the environment. Or do we determine that if you do it, there will be tough consequences for it and enforce them? And so I just gave 2 sides to the coin. There's no right or wrong. It's an opinion. And it's an example. We can police ourselves with things we want. Other things, the police will lock you up for. And everybody knows it. And nobody really texts it, right? I don't know when last you've seen somebody just walking around naked. But for the most part, people know that if you do it, you're going to get giggles sandwiches, right?
Yeah, well, folks out there, you're welcome to ask questions of our guests this night, and we'll endeavor to try and address them. And so when we look at people now, we talk about sustainability of each individual and their contributions to this picture. To me, if we want to be more sustainable, I mean, we have to contribute less to it and then to affect the change. So people have influence. And we talk about money influence, we talk about their passion, their creativity, their skills, their tools, their connections, and voting powers and stuff, right? Activism, you talked about the government and some of the laws that is in place and some of the things that they're doing. Help our audience understand from an activism point of view, what are some of the things that they, if they're so inclined for this climate change, that they would want to be activists in assisting and getting things to move in the direction we need to move in.
Sure.
Whether it's be a cleaner nation or whatever. Yeah.
Great question, Happy. Great. And I think it ties into one of the key pillars that you mentioned earlier. I think to marry the digital side to the environment side is critical. We're seeing this transition, as you know, into this digital currencies and cryptocurrencies and us basically trying to set ourselves up as sort of a digital asset manager management company or financial
Right.
services 2.0, 3.0. That's not my area, but we know what we're trending toward. So
Right.
if we're talking about the carbon credits, we know we protect a lot of our environment. We know that our environment, as we mentioned, it helps to sequester carbon dioxide, et cetera. Then how can we marry the two? How can we have digital assets that are connected to the environment? How can we become a global standard for maybe trading carbon credits? See, those are the types of things that I think the government and our leaders have a very unique opportunity. They've already established that we are leaders in terms of the digital asset space with sand dollar and crypto, et cetera. We know now that we want to take a serious stance on climate change. We've seen Dorian, we saw our Prime Minister at COP, as you mentioned, with his passionate speech. So the two can be married in the digital management of our environmental assets. And that framework could be one to help other nations, small island states like us, larger nations, to also trade, let's call it, environmental related assets in the digital space. It's a brilliant marriage that I think will allow us to be global leaders in things that we're already clearly at the forefront in.
So what do we as individuals need to do in order to accelerate that? I mean, if we're taking coal out the ground and burning it and that accelerating the climate change, then we could continue to do things to accelerate it, but let's accelerate what is positive. So if these
100%.
changes are needed, then what do we need to do to help the people understand what they, I don't necessarily mean go turn over cars and pull the people out of parliament and throw them down and stuff, but what are some of the energy things that we could be doing as individuals?
So I would say, and I'm no way an expert on this, I'm just sharing my opinion on the direction we're going. I think more aggressive engagement with our academia is important.
Right.
I see, for example, UB, BTVI as opportunities to have thought leaders. And thought leaders are important in a developing country, right? Research is important. Research, a lot of our research in this country, and we see it extensively, is done internationally.
Right.
It's done by foreign companies.
You saw with COVID.
Foreign.
Almost everything was done with COVID elsewhere.
Offshore. So when we talk, even in terms of the environment, let's bring it back to what we're specifically talking about. A lot of that research isn't done here. It's not that we don't have capacity. Sometimes it's opportunity. Sometimes it's funding. Sometimes it's just we need some support. But more needs to be Bahamian-led through intentional intervention and leadership by our administrations, et cetera, to make sure that academia is playing its part. Why is that important? The studies, et cetera, that are done oftentimes are empowering international companies to take that and figure it out somewhere else.
Right.
Right? They're solving the problems here, but the solutions are not remaining in our country. We need to solve our problems here. And if we're talking strictly about the digital asset side of environments, that's one that we should be pretty good at. Because once again, we're leaders in the digital space. We have a school of sustainability at UB. Our prime minister is definitely pro climate change, et cetera. How can we marry the two together using academia to now put forward the policies and the cultural changes that are needed to make this a reality? In my opinion, that is a major step that's missing in the big picture of things.
So that brings on then the new built environment. That is something that we press left, right, and center from here on this talk platform, that we create this new built environment so that we could become successful in our society. And it talks about sustainability for generations to come and the like. And so we need to create this political, economic, and social environment of our society formulated through intentional thought and action designed to create the greatest opportunity to build the highest quality of life for our citizens, residents, and those subscribing to and supporting the culture of the 242, and which will provide sustainability for generations to come, right? And so that's the environment to me that we have to establish in order for us to move this forward, right? And so if we look at that and then we say that if people have influence with their money and their creativity or their connections that they have, we look at that and say, should we now figure out what is in the best interest from a climate change point of view and not spend money on things that might be counterproductive to that? For example, beef, right? The agriculture and forestry is said to be the second greatest area of contribution.
Yes.
And beef is a big part of that, the farming of animals and stuff like that. So if we eat less beef, then that means there'll be a lower demand for it.
Correct. I agree. So the challenge that I would have is, once again, we're a democratic country. I love me a good steak. So good luck in trying to tell me that I can't eat a good steak. Now,
not can't tell you, but just eat less. To train our people or encourage our people to do less. Yeah.
So once again, there's two sides to the coin. Is that something that we wait? Let's use the Junkanoo example versus the walking around naked example. Is it something that we want to put a restrictive law in place that the country's only going, well, first of all, we import most things. So are we only going to import a certain amount of beef, and therefore without anything above that quota, we won't? Or are we going to try to culturally educate our people? Once again, I think our population is somewhere around 400,000 people. We have something like 7 million tourists here a year. Many come on cruise ships, but still, are we going to limit our hotels? Are we going to say to Bahama and Atlantis, well, you only can bring in so many steaks because this is what the country is going to establish as a policy? And then Bahamians can't get it in the food store and fish fry, but the tourists or visitors can get it in the hotels. You know, that would be an issue. So me personally, I think that we just have to be intentional about education.
Right.
I remember
that's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
When I grew up, there was the campaign about saving water. That was when you would on ZNS. So we had ZNS then, right? And there was only one set of things that came on. There was Sesame Street, and the Sesame Street, there would be an ad with a little fish, right? And I still remember it. I haven't seen it for 30 something years, but with a little fish, basically to be dying because you don't turn your water off. And I now teach my 4.5-year-old daughter to turn the water off because I learned to turn the water off when I was 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. So once again, that's cultural. I also remember the little rings on top of the cans of soda. Remember, you cut them so it doesn't choke the fish.
Yeah.
To this day, I cut the rings. My daughter and son cut the rings on it. And it's because when I was 5, 6, 7, 8, I cut the rings because remember there was a big campaign about it go around the fish and the fish choke, right? So 2 examples of small steps that would have been instilled early on in my formative years that I pass on to my kids who now automatically do it, even though they're young, and will hopefully pass it on. So how do we take the steps now? We mightn't see the results for a while, but how do we take those steps now? And I think that is what we as a country have to decide what is important.
Right. And, you know, and I think like you mentioned, and also Ambassador Gomez had said before, former Ambassador Gomez said, you know, it's about the PSA, the public service announcements and helping people understand the connection as to why we need to do that. And that's why I mentioned that earlier. And so if we say that we have all of these things that people can do, right? Besides the activism with governments and stuff like that, we have where we could reduce our own scenario. If we have cars, when we buy another car, instead of buying a regular car, buy an electric car, you know, and our numbers might be small, but when we look at the total picture, because the carbon thing is a global thing,
Agree.
Our little small numbers with somebody else's small numbers, sooner or later adds up to a big number.
Agreed.
And that's why I see that as a big thing. Simple thing is listening to engineers like yourself and myself for code issues and following those things can help us. You talk about water flooding in an area and then you can't get out your house or the like. There's many things like that we could do. Eating what we eat, rebalancing our food so that, you know, we are able to to spend money in a different light and so forth. So when we look at all of those things though, and we want to move it forward, this goes back now down to leadership then, in terms of how do we encourage individuals to want to change their habits, because habits is something, like you mentioned, nobody really likes to change it. You want to eat your steak. I had cancer of the throat and I still want my steak, right? And I get fussed out every time they go to Houston and I put a picture up, but you know, it tastes good, especially in Houston. What do we need to do to get to have a more sustainable environment, a culture, a more sustainable culture, people more in tune with becoming more sustainable? Let me say it that way.
Yeah, great questions. I think, Dale, part of it is obviously at the policy level. Like, for example, you raised the whole point about the electric cars, right? When the government would have reduced duty to 10% on hybrid, before electric cars were popular, 5, 6, 7 years ago. When I had to decide whether I was going to buy a hybrid vehicle or a regular vehicle, I got a hybrid vehicle for my wife. Right? Obviously, a low environmental footprint, yes, but it also cost me less money to buy. Now, I think electric is either duty free or very close to it, whereas a traditional vehicle still has a high duty. So once again, it incentivizes, and I saw a study saying that I think we're per capita some of the highest in the world in electric vehicles and certain other things. So I think at a policy level, it's important for those decisions to help to guide our culture, because that's a prime example. People, if it's cheaper and it's still functional, people will buy it. There's no question about it, right? On the individual level, I think running educational campaigns is important. It should start in the schools. If the kids in the schools now were learning recycling from day one, they're learning backyard farming from day one, etc., then these are the habits, and everybody won't do it, we understand, but these are the habits you would then carry through your life. You then teach it to your kids. Back to the same example, me turning off the water, I teach my daughter, me cutting the rings on the soda, etc. So we have to determine which of the priorities. Once again, I think everyone in the country should know how to swim, right? If everyone took swimming in school, we would swim, right? Which means then our kids would swim, etc. So if we determine that's a survival skill, we make readily available pools. We have basketball courts everywhere in the country. And not that every school has to have a pool, but it could be community pools that schools use, etc., both government and private who don't have it. Many private schools have pools, many government schools don't. Then there could be a intentional movement of our culture towards being able to swim. So if that means now when floodwaters come, maybe just 10% more people could survive because we could swim, that's a significant amount. If one life is saved, it's a significant amount. So that's just a tangible example. Another example, and I know we're getting close on time, is that remember, we are the first responders. So let's say a hurricane hits a family island. It takes the defense force, the Coast Guard, etc., normally a few hours to a day before the all clear, before they can get in. The first people on the ground are the people who are in that community. They can save oftentimes a lot of lives if there's some basic training. Like basic things like the backhoe operator or the excavator operator who's in your community could go in and know how to put the bucket up so that the people who are on the roof could get on it. Grammy could get handed through the window, and then they take them to the clinic. That is something we also could do that's low-hanging fruit that could prepare us for these hurricanes. So this, and once again, that's a grassroots initiative. You know, we could have that training. You don't have to, this is a once a year certification, but those types of steps we can culturally make to prepare ourselves for what's inevitably coming in our lifetime.
So basically what we're saying then is that there is a wealth of opportunity that particularly the youth who have energy and creativity is part of their natural base in the digital world in particular, to find solutions in order to help with our public awareness and activism and stuff, right? So if that's the case, then is the BRONs and the Eedens and the rest out there willing to fund them? Because somebody's going to have to fund what they put. The youth don't have the money to do it.
So like some of the things like coming on shows like yours are also part of what we do, right? Because everything isn't a cost. It's a direct cost in terms of time.
Yeah.
We do, donations and sponsorships. We sponsor interns. We have over a dozen interns a year, for example. So
Right.
we are intentional about making sure that young people, and many of those are paid internships, just to be clear,
Okay.
right? And so we're not paying for the contribution they make. We're paying because this allows you to have an opportunity to get real life experience, to sit with some of the brightest team members that we have. We have over 60 staff in the Bahamas,
Right.
for
Right.
example. So you take 60 young Bahamians, and the average age in our company is 29. So we're a young company working on many of the largest projects. We now can expose that to high school and college students, whether they're studying or recently finished. And hopefully that will help to transfer the knowledge from the working world, prepare them for it so that they can also help with their studies and application. And then hopefully they share the message and spread it on to somebody else, because each one has the ability to teach one. And that is how a cultural revolution starts.
Right. And that's exactly what I'm saying. So we know that you all do the core technical, and when I say technical, I just mean the fundamental portion of the knowledge transfer and the like. I'm talking about once that information, you put that out there, then you have, to me, it's the opportunity for the wider scope of youth who out there, whether they're creative in the digital arena or arts and crafts or whatever, to formulate that. Like how in the old days, Sparrow and KBM used to take, Eddie Menace used to take what was happening in society and spin that into a song, and then it transfers out. And people gravitate to that, right? And so I'm thinking that is an opportunity now with our youth. We all over Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and everything doing all these stuff that might not be productive, but this is a way that they can become creative and make a fun, some dollars for their creativity versus just having bragging rights as to who do what, and then when we go back to school is another issue. So
Agreed.
what is the corporate world then role in trying to get this done? That's basically what I'm asking.
Sure. So I think it's obviously taking a corporate position on the importance of these things. We do that, right? We at BRON have tree planting initiatives. We do pro bono design work. We do extensive presentations at schools. We lead the ladies of BRON during International Women's Day. They go and do presentations, and those presentations include monetary as well as information, et cetera, to get more women into STEM, as well as we promote individual, and this is a corporate standpoint, promoting individual expertise within the company to take their information out there. Like Scott Johnson is one of the guys, you might remember him from, he's one of the cane toad guys when the cane toads were going everywhere. And he's a reptile specialist. And he has a strong following on Facebook, on Instagram, etc., where he deals with reptiles. And for example, a lot of Bahamians are scared of snakes. We often kill snakes, right? But many of our snakes, as you know, aren't dangerous to humans. And they are an important part of our ecosystem, right? If we started killing snakes, it'd be pretty bad, right? And so his education is around that. So he does a lot individually. So we as BRON, and he's one of our team members, a senior environmental scientist, we encourage and support him in his efforts towards promoting the importance of reptiles and habitat, and how to deal with invasive species like cane toads, etc. So that's just one example of how corporate Bahamas can support its individual team members so that they are using their passions and purpose to also better and promote what we want as a culture.
Yes, and so I know those two halos was going to kick in at some point in time. So
yes,
that's great. Cool. Well, Carlos, I know we could go another hour with the amount of questions that people have out there that we've been formulating over time. But it's been real nice. It's enlightening to have these type of conversations. We hope it be of value to people, and we'd like to thank you for taking the time to be here this evening, because we know that fireball at home is waiting for you so that you could do all those good things. I remember those days. I'm not sure I want those days to come back, but you never know. Things happen, right? Or we intentionally make them happen. But so, is there anything that you would like to say to the general public out there?
I would say happy. It's obviously an honor and a pleasure to be here. I congratulate you on continuing to spread the word on so many poignant topics. I think that it's very encouraging to see the dialogue that's happening nationally and it translating into action in certain areas that are critical. So while there is more we always can do, we do have to acknowledge that progress is being made. We are moving forward. And so let's continue to take our individual accountability, like I mentioned earlier, seriously. Let's continue to do our part in making sure that because of our footprint as Bahamians and as corporate and global citizens, that the world is left better off as a result of us being here, right? And so we deposit every time we pick up a trash bag or a bottle, we are depositing a positive note into the database of our footprint. Every time we throw that bottle out of a window or pollute, we are withdrawing. And so let us make sure that we end up not with in a loss, but or overdraft, but let's make sure that the reason we were here led to a positive footprint on Earth.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you kindly for that. And we know that not just the fireball is going to be there waiting for you. Your son, your daughter's son will be equally fighting for your time for the rest of this evening. So, Madam Producer, everybody on Facebook, on YouTube, thank you again. Also, there's many more videos online, as Carlos had mentioned. So be welcome to join and sift through them and see what you like. And if there's anything you want us to address on this show, shoot us a note, tell us what it is, and we'll endeavor to source a competent person to come to the table and have a discussion. Stay safe, enjoy, and have a good one. Say hello to everybody for me, Carlos.
Will do. Thank you very much, Happy. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to everyone who viewed. Appreciate the invite and looking forward to it.
Awesome. Great.
Take care.
You enjoy. Yes. Madam Producer.
Enjoyed the show? Then subscribe to us for more educational and inspirational content. Ring the bell so you never miss a show. Let's change the narrative 242